I have spent most of my life watching people misunderstand money. They think money is mainly about arithmetic. How much comes in, how much goes out, what the market returned, what the mortgage costs, how much they need before they can finally relax. Those things matter, but they do not tell the full story. The deeper truth is that money changes the way a mind works, long before it changes the way a balance sheet looks. That is why a person can make a decent living and still feel cornered every day. That is why another person with a smaller paycheck can somehow move through the world with more patience, more confidence, and more control. The difference is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes it comes down to one threshold, not a glamorous threshold. Not the kind of number people brag about at dinner, not the fantasy number that gets thrown around by television panels and internet gurus who like to talk as if wealth begins only after $1 million. I have never believed that $1 million matters. 6 figures matter. Every large number matters. But for an ordinary person trying to change the direction of a life, the first truly transformative number is often much smaller. It is the number where a person stops being hunted by every little surprise. It is the number where a person stops making every decision with the next paycheck standing over the shoulder, like a creditor. It is the number where the future stops feeling like a hallway that gets narrower every month. For many people, that number is $20,000. That may sound too small to be life-changing. It may sound underwhelming in an age where people scroll past headlines about billionaires, private jets, artificial intelligence fortunes, and homes that sell for prices that would have sounded insane to a rational farmer. But life is not changed only by spectacular sums. Life is often changed by the first amount large enough to create breathing room. And breathing room is one of the most undervalued assets in the world. People who have never had it assume it is a comfort. People who have had it and lost it know it is power. Most financial suffering is not dramatic in the way movies present it. It is repetitive. It is waking up and doing a silent calculation before your feet touch the floor. It is checking a bank account with a little knot in the stomach. It is wondering whether the car can make it one more month. It is deciding whether a minor purchase is harmless or whether that harmless thing will quietly ruin the rest of the week. It is pretending to be calm while a bill sits unopened because you already know the number inside it and you do not want the number to become real. That kind of life does not only drain cash, it drains judgment, it drains dignity, it drains mental bandwidth. When a person lives that way long enough, he does not simply become poorer in dollars. He becomes narrower in behavior. He takes the first offer, he accepts the bad arrangement, he delays the necessary conversation, he remains in the unproductive job, he tolerates the unreasonable boss, he keeps the wrong apartment because moving feels dangerous. He stays loyal to a system that is not loyal to him because he has no room to endure a transition. People often call that caution. A great deal of the time, it is not caution. It is captivity. I have seen smart people make foolish decisions because they were cornered by small numbers. I have seen mediocre people appear confident simply because they had a cushion. That cushion changes the mind before it changes the lifestyle. That is why I take the first $20,000 so seriously. It is not just savings. It is not just an emergency fund. It is not just the first piece of a portfolio. It is the first wall between you and desperation. And once desperation loses its daily grip on you, an entirely different person can begin to appear. People talk a great deal about intelligence in investing. They talk about valuation. They talk about earnings quality. They talk about competitive advantage. All of that is fine, but the first advantage many people need is not analytical. It is psychological. A mind trapped in survival mode cannot think in long arcs. It cannot easily delay gratification because delay feels dangerous when nothing feels secure. It cannot calmly weigh opportunity because every choice feels loaded with immediate consequence. A person in survival mode does not ask, what is the highest use of this capital over 10 years? He asks, can I make it to Friday? There is no shame in that question. It is a human question, but it is not a question that builds wealth. Wealth is built by people who can look beyond the next week. Wealth is built by people who can let a seed stay in the ground long enough to become a tree. That requires time. It requires patience. It requires distance from panic. And for many ordinary families, $20,000 is the first number that creates enough distance to let patience exist. I do not mean that $20,000 makes a person rich. It does not. I do not mean it solves every problem. It does not. Illness can still happen. Layoffs can still happen. Markets can still fall. children can still need help, roofs can still leak, furnaces can still fail. Life remains life, but life feels different when trouble arrives, and you are not naked in front of it. A person with no cushion experiences every interruption as a threat to identity. A car repair is not just a car repair. It is a vote against stability. A rent increase is not just a rent increase. It is a warning that the ground may not hold. A medical bill is not just a bill. It is a reminder that one event can reorder the whole month. But when there is a real cash buffer, something subtle and powerful happens. Problems shrink back to their true size. The repair becomes annoying. The bill becomes inconvenient. The layoff becomes serious, but not instantly fatal. That distinction matters more than most people realize. The poor man is not always the man with the smallest balance. Very often, the poor man is the man for whom every event carries catastrophic potential. That is why the first major threshold matters. It lowers the catastrophe level of ordinary life. And once life no longer feels catastrophic every other Tuesday, you start to see possibilities that were hidden by fear. This is where most people misunderstand money. They think having money mainly allows you to buy more things. That is the shallow use of money. The deeper use of money is that it allows you to buy better behavior. It allows you to say no. It allows you to wait. It allows you to choose. It allows you to refuse the ugly deal. It allows you to walk away from what diminishes you. There are few powers more valuable than the ability to walk away. A person who must cling to every paycheck has almost no negotiating power. He may speak bravely at dinner. He may sound bold online. But he knows down in the bones that he cannot afford a long interruption. That knowledge leaks into his posture. It leaks into his voice. It leaks into the way he tolerates nonsense from people who have less character but more leverage. Now imagine that same person with $20,000, quietly set aside. He does not become invincible. He does not become reckless. But he becomes less breakable. He can survive a gap. He can survive a delay. He can survive an honest demand for better treatment. That changes the way he enters a room. He asks for the raise. He applies for the better job. He resists the unreasonable demand. He chooses not to grovel for scraps. He can endure short-term discomfort for long-term improvement. In the world of work, that is an enormous shift. People like to imagine career success as a clean ladder. Most of the time, it is not. It is a sequence of negotiations. Some are formal, most are silent. Who can wait? Who can threaten to leave? Who can tolerate uncertainty? Who can reject a weak offer? Who can hold out for terms that respect talent? Money influences all of those things. Not because money makes a person morally superior, not because money makes a person smarter, but because money changes the cost of saying no. That is why I often think of the first $20,000 as walking away money. You hope not to use it for dramatic exits. That is not the point. Its real value is that once it exists, your whole relationship with work changes before you ever touch the funds. Confidence grows when panic recedes. Clarity grows when fear stops monopolizing the mind. And when confidence and clarity improve, results often improve too. Then the situation becomes self-reinforcing. You negotiate better because you are less desperate. You earn more because you negotiate better. You save more because you earn more and think more clearly. You invest more because saving has become part of identity rather than a temporary punishment. That is how lives change. Not usually through one explosive leap, through a series of compounding advantages that begin with breathing room. People understand compound interest in theory. Very few understand compound behavior. Compound behavior is what happens when one good condition makes the next good decision easier. A person who has no savings tells himself that he will invest later, after life calms down. Life does not calm down. A person who has no emergency fund tells himself that he will start building one after one more purchase, one more trip, one more upgrade, one more month. Those months, a person who has never seen 5 digits sitting still in an account cannot easily imagine himself as an investor. He may admire investing. He may talk about investing. He may even read about it. But identity resists what evidence has not yet confirmed. Once a person reaches $20,000, the evidence begins to change. He no longer sees himself purely as someone trying. He begins to see himself as someone who can accumulate. That identity shift is worth more than many spreadsheets capture. Money habits do not become durable because someone watched a motivational video. They become durable because a person lives through the proof that discipline worked. Saving $20,000 from zero is proof. It is proof that restraint was not pointless. It is proof that saying no repeatedly did not merely produce deprivation, it produced structure, it produced security, it produced a different version of the self. That matters because the hardest financial task is not selecting the perfect investment. It is becoming the kind of person who can consistently withhold consumption in favor of future freedom. That kind of person is dangerous in the best sense of the word. He is dangerous to manipulative employers. He is dangerous to predatory lenders. He is dangerous to advertisers who rely on insecurity. He is dangerous to status games. He is dangerous to every industry built on keeping people emotionally reactive and financially weak. Once a person has trained himself to accumulate and preserve the first real chunk of capital, he is no longer easy prey. This is why I smile a little when people mock small milestones. They say $20,000 is nothing. Nothing compared with a hedge fund, nothing compared with a private island, nothing compared with a Manhattan penthouse perhaps, but compared with the average person living at the mercy of every small surprise, it is not nothing. It is a frontier. It is the point at which the internal economy changes. And once the internal economy changes, the external one often follows. Now let me tell you what I think most people miss about this threshold. They imagine the magic begins because the returns become large. That is only partly true. Yes, scale matters. The same rate of return on a larger sum produces a larger result. There is nothing mysterious about that. If $1,000 compounds, the result feels modest. If $20,000 compounds at the same rate, at small numbers, compounding behaves like a whisper. At larger numbers, it becomes a voice you cannot ignore. That is true. But the psychological compounding matters even more in the early innings. Let us be honest. When you have $2,000 invested, the market may be teaching you good lessons, but it is not yet changing the structure of your life. When you have $20,000 working, your mind begins to believe the machine is real. You can see the first signs of self-propulsion. You can feel that not every dollar of progress came from labor alone. That realization is the seed of freedom. A man who understands that money can work begins to look at every spending choice differently. He starts asking a better question. Not, can I make this monthly payment? That question ruins lives. The better question is, what future am I giving up in order to own this thing? Now, that is a painful question at first. It is supposed to be. Painful questions often save people from expensive mistakes. Much of middle-class financial damage happens because people have been trained to think in payments instead of total cost. Can I afford the car payment? Can I afford the upgraded apartment? Can I afford the finance furniture? Can I afford the premium package? Can I afford the subscription? Can I afford the vacation? If I split it across a few cards and pretend the interest does not exist. Those are not serious questions. Those are seductions dressed as calculations. The serious question is always one layer deeper. What is this doing to my freedom? What is this doing to my future earning power? What is this doing to my ability to say no? What is this doing to the first real pile of capital I am trying to build? A person who reaches $20,000 and understands what it took to get there starts to see opportunity cost everywhere. Not in a neurotic way, not in a miserable way, in a clarifying way. That fancy car is no longer just transportation with leather seats and a clever advertising campaign wrapped around it. It becomes years of delayed compounding. It becomes future options traded for present theater. It becomes labor pre-committed to an object that will almost certainly fall in value, while demanding insurance, maintenance, attention, and more labor. This is why expensive cars have ruined so many balance sheets, while making their owners feel successful for roughly 11 minutes at a red light. I do not say that because cars are evil. They are not. I say it because people often confuse symbols of wealth with engines of wealth. They are not the same. A symbol of wealth can be rented. An engine of wealth must be protected. The average person spends an astonishing share of life feeding symbols. The house that stretches the budget and quietly turns the family into wage slaves. The car that announces status but steals flexibility. The wardrobe meant to signal success to people who are too busy worrying about themselves to study the label in your collar. The leisure purchases made not from joy but from a tired desire to feel briefly rewarded for enduring a life that feels too expensive. That cycle keeps people poor in a way that no single item can explain. It is not one mistake. It is an ecosystem of leaks. This is another reason the first $20,000 matters so much. It forces a confrontation. A person cannot usually save that amount from zero without discovering where the leaks are. He has to see them, he has to name them, He has to watch the little comforts and the large vanity purchases and the mindless conveniences for what they are. He has to decide, perhaps for the first time in adult life, what actually deserves his labor. That is a serious moral moment, whether people want to admit it or not, because labor is life. When you waste money carelessly, you are not only wasting dollars, you are wasting hours, you are wasting mornings. You are wasting years of your future effort on things that may not even matter to you in 6 months. The person who learns to save the first real pile of money usually learns something else along the way. He learns that many of the things he thought he wanted were never truly his desires. They were social cues, they were anxiety purchases, they were boredom purchases, they were purchases designed to patch over the fatigue of living without a system. Once a real financial foundation begins to form, desire becomes easier to examine honestly. Do I want this, or do I want the image attached to it? Do I want this, or do I want relief from stress? Do I want this, or am I reacting to what everyone else appears to own? Those are powerful questions. A person who can answer them well will not merely have more savings. He will have a better life, because intentionality is a richer condition than indulgence. There is another thing that happens around this threshold. Small expenses begin to lose their tyranny. A broke person is often forced to obsess over trivia: the cheaper cereal, the cheaper coffee, the cheaper lunch, the cheaper detergent, the cheaper route, the cheaper everything. Some of that attention is necessary. I would never mock prudence, but a life trapped at that level of analysis becomes exhausting. And it often distracts from the large decisions that actually determine long-term outcomes. Where you live matters more than your opinion about coffee. What you drive matters more than your opinion about bananas. How much you save matters more than almost every small debate that consumes people in the checkout line. Your earning power matters more. Your investing behavior matters more. Your ability to avoid disastrous commitments matters more. Once you have the first real cushion, your mind can rise above the insect level of financial life. You stop spending all day trying to save pennies while ignoring the choices that cost you tens of thousands of dollars. That is one of the hidden gifts of the first substantial cash reserve. It restores perspective. A person with no reserve can be intelligent and still spend mental energy in a terribly inefficient way. He is trying to defend every inch because the border is undefended. A person with reserves can allocate mental energy more rationally. He can think strategically. He can focus on big moves rather than tiny cuts alone. That is not laziness, that is maturity. You start to see money as a system: income, savings rate, fixed costs, variable costs, risk, optionality, compounding taxes, behavior. You stop treating money like a sequence of disconnected emergencies and start treating it like an enterprise that requires management. That is when adulthood in finance really begins. I have often said that temperament matters more than intellect in investing. The same is true in building a life. If you want to know whether a person is likely to build real wealth, do not begin by asking what stock tips he follows. Ask whether he can hold the line against unnecessary spending long enough to build his first serious reserve. Ask whether he can tolerate being unfashionable. Ask whether he can delay applause. Ask whether he can live for a period below what he could technically afford. Those are better indicators than many income figures, because the man who cannot keep money will not stay rich, even if luck drops a large number in his lap. The man who can keep money is already learning the habits required to multiply it. This is where people often commit a terrible error. They finally reach the milestone, and because the effort was painful, they treat the money like a trophy meant to be spent. That is a tragedy. The first $20,000 is not a reward. It is a foundation. It is the seed corn. A farmer who eats the seed corn because he feels he has earned a feast may enjoy a nice evening and ruin the season. Finance is full of people doing exactly that with more sophisticated language. They save a little. They feel proud. They decide they deserve an upgrade. The account empties. The mind returns to fragility. The cycle begins again. One reason people remain stuck for decades is that they keep crossing the same small hill and then rolling backward down it. Each time they get close to real momentum, they convert potential into consumption. Then they wonder why wealth seems reserved for other people. Wealth is not reserved for saints or geniuses. Very often it is reserved for those who refuse to interrupt compounding for applause. You must protect the first pile. You must let it become the second pile, then the third. Then something interesting begins to happen. The machine starts helping. At first, nearly all progress comes from labor. You save because you work. You invest because you saved. The account grows slowly because the account is small. That phase tests character, then the balance reaches a point where returns begin to contribute in a way that is emotionally visible. It is still not enough to retire, it is still not enough to become careless. But it is enough to prove that the engine is real. Now labor is no longer working alone. Capital has entered the room. Once capital begins to work beside you, your relationship with time changes. You no longer need every future dollar to come from your direct exertion. That may not sound dramatic on paper. In a human life, it is profoundly dramatic. A person who depends entirely on labor has a ceiling dictated by energy, health, time, and market demand for his skills. A person who has trained capital to work with him has introduced another source of motion. That second source is what eventually makes independence possible. Not comfort, not labels, not image. Motion. That is why I care less about financial theater and more about whether a person has built his first engine. $20,000 is often where the spark becomes visible. It is where people stop feeling that investing is a hobby for others. It becomes a practical force in their own lives. And again, the true transformation is not just numeric, it is behavioral. A person with a serious reserve begins to evaluate opportunity differently. When a conference might improve his career, he can go. When an apprenticeship or certification would raise future earnings, he can consider it. When a short period between jobs would allow him to move into a better field, he can survive it. When a promising investment opportunity appears, he is capable of looking at it soberly rather than wistfully. This is what people mean, usually without understanding their own words, when they say money goes. It is not mysticism, it is optionality. Money creates room to act. Room to act creates better decisions. Better decisions create more money. The process can spiral upward just as surely as bad habits spiral downward. A man with no cushion cannot participate in many opportunities, even when he recognizes them. That is what poverty often does. It does not only remove comfort, it removes timing. Many opportunities have an expiration date. The person with no reserve arrives too late or watches from the sidewalk. The person with reserves, at least, has the right to choose. That right is priceless. Now, I do not want anyone to romanticize deprivation in order to reach this number. I am not advising a person to become joyless. I am not saying that every pleasure is foolish or that every dollar spent on present life is an offense against the future. That kind of moralism usually collapses under real human pressure. A sound financial life is not built on self-hatred. It is built on clarity. The point is not to extract all joy from the present. The point is to stop sacrificing the future for pleasures that do not even deliver much joy. Many people would discover, if they were honest, that half the spending which keeps them stuck does not enrich them in any durable way. It merely distracts them. There is a difference between spending on what genuinely matters to you and spending automatically because the world has trained you to medicate stress with transactions. The person who saves the first serious reserve often discovers that his happiest moments were never waiting at the end of the next upgrade. They were waiting at the end of reduced fear. That is one of the finest returns money can buy. Less fear, better sleep, cleaner choices, greater dignity, a quieter mind. These are not luxuries. They are conditions under which a good life becomes possible. That is why I would rather see a young person with $20,000 of disciplined reserves and a modest car than a young person with almost nothing saved and a shiny vehicle financed to the eyebrows. The first one looks ordinary from the outside and powerful from the inside. The second one looks powerful from the outside and brittle from the inside. The world often confuses those two states. The world sees the payment and mistakes it for prosperity. I have never respected that confusion. Prosperity is not what you display. Prosperity is what you can endure. Prosperity is how long you can think. Prosperity is whether you own your schedule or sell it in small frightened pieces. Prosperity is whether a setback changes your plan or destroys it. That is why the first $20,000 is not a small milestone. It is the first proof that your life is becoming harder to derail. If you are below it now, do not despise the distance. Many good lives are built exactly there, in the season where progress still feels invisible. This is where character does its quiet work. This is where you begin noticing every leak. This is where you learn to live on less than you earn without telling yourself sad stories about deprivation. This is where you start to understand that each saved dollar is not just preserved money. It is preserved choice. It is preserved time. It is preserved courage for the future version of yourself who will need options. Keep going until the number is real. Then protect it. Then keep adding. Do not celebrate by tearing down the wall you just built, Let the wall stand, let it become thicker. Let the account become evidence. Let the evidence become identity. Let the identity become behavior, and let the behavior, repeated long enough, become wealth. That is how freedom usually arrives. Not as spectacle, as accumulated margin, not as one big win, as 1,000 small refusals to trade tomorrow for theater today. I have never seen a life improved by pretending the future can be neglected without consequence. I have seen many lives improved by the moment a person finally decides that security is not a boring goal, but a beautiful one. That moment often begins with the first real reserve. For many people, that reserve is $20,000. Reach it, guard it, then make it the smallest amount of serious money you will ever have again.